Thom Hartmann here on the news. You need to know this. Our nation's highest court has struck down a key provision of the Voting Rights Act. In a 5-4 ruling delivered by Chief Justice John Roberts, the Supreme Court ruled that the formula used to decide what states are subject to voting law preclearance is unconstitutional. Under the Voting Rights Act, certain states with a history of racial discrimination in voting are required to seek and obtain approval from the Department of Justice or a 3-judge panel in D.C. before making any changes to their voting laws. In 2006, Congress overwhelmingly reauthorized the 1965 Voting Rights Act by huge majorities in the House and the Senate, and President Bush signed the legislation within 1 week. Despite the fact that Congress had numerous hearings and compiled thousands of pages of documents while reconsidering the Voting Rights Act, the court determined that the formula Congress enacted to decide which states would be covered by preclearance was no longer constitutional. The opinion stated that, quote, coverage today is based on decades-old data and eradicated practices, end quote. Chief Justice Roberts wrote, quote, Congress, if it is to divide the states, must identify those jurisdictions to be singled out on a basis that makes sense in light of current conditions. It cannot rely on the past, end quote. The court complained that Congress could have acted to update the formula, but did not. Justice Ginsburg wrote a dissenting opinion that Justices Breyer, Sotomayor, and Kagan joined. She quoted Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. writing, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice." History has proved King right. Although circumstances in Alabama have changed, serious concerns remain. Because of today's ruling, it will be much more difficult to ensure that those serious concerns do not block minority voters from the polls. In Screwed news, on Monday evening, the United States Senate voted to approve the so-called Border Surge Amendment. In total, 67 senators agreed to devote over $30 billion to increase border security. The measure calls for doubling the number of border security agents, building over 700 more miles of border fence, and increasing surveillance using drones and thermal imaging cameras. All of those security measures must be in place before any undocumented immigrant can get legal status. Despite these extreme and expensive proposals, nearly every Democrat in the Senate supported the amendment to get Republican support. However, in the process of gaining about a dozen GOP votes, Democrats may have lost some support from immigration reform advocates. A coalition of groups who represent border communities called the proposal an example of excessive and wasteful government spending and an assault on our system of checks and balances. Even Kevin Appleby, the director of migration policy at the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, warned, if the path to citizenship is further weakened, there could come a tipping point where the bill becomes unsupportable. It's a difficult predicament. Democrats must get Republican votes to enact immigration reform, but if they move too far to the right, they may lose the support of the American people in the process. In the best of the rest of the news, yesterday, New Jersey lawmakers adopted a measure to ban sexual orientation conversion therapy. The vote came only a week after the controversial group Exodus International closed its doors and apologized for the harm they caused while trying to change people's sexual orientation. The measure was approved 56-14 in the state assembly, and it is expected to pass in the state senate later this week. New Jersey Governor Chris Christie has previously said he opposed so-called conversion therapy, but his office would not comment on whether or not he will sign the final bill. If the ban is enacted, New Jersey would become the second state in our nation to prohibit licensed therapists from counseling LGBT kids to change their sexual orientation, but it would not affect religious organizations. California is the only state that currently has such a law in the books, and it is currently on hold while a federal appeals court weighs the issue. If New Jersey enacts this conversion therapy ban, it will likely be challenged in the courts as well. The Associated Press has obtained a document that further debunks Darrell Issa's IRS conspiracy theory. Apparently, in addition to Tea Party groups being subjected to additional scrutiny, groups with Israel, Progressive, and Occupy in their names were reviewed as well. While the investigation may certainly point to the IRS using shortcuts to identify political groups, it has also blown apart the myth that only Tea Party groups are being targeted. Acting IRS Commissioner Danny Werfel issued an 83-page report on his review of the screening procedures and said there was a wide-ranging set of categories and cases that spanned a broad spectrum. He told reporters, quote, "We have not found evidence of intentional wrongdoing by anyone in the IRS or involvement in these matters by anyone outside the IRS," end quote. However, not wanting to let go of the scandal, House Oversight Chairman Darrell Issa said Mr. Werfel's assertion, quote, "can only be called premature." Right. So despite piles of evidence that the White House was not involved, it appears Darrell Issa is going to continue the investigation. And finally, we now know what it takes to get all of Washington working together. A red panda. Yesterday, Rusty the red panda escaped from the National Zoo, and the entire District of Columbia came together to help ensure his safe return. Rusty was spotted in a D.C. suburb, and zoo employees were able to capture him and send him back to his home enclosure. Even in times of extreme weather, national tragedy, or financial disaster, it's rare to see Washington working together. Considering Rusty was able to unite D.C. police, politicians, and the public, some are suggesting that the red panda should run for office. Who knows? Perhaps he'd increase Congress's dismal approval rating. And that's the way it is today, Tuesday, June 25th, 2013. I'm Thom Hartmann on the news.